ancient shadows, scouts of the Roman Empire. Before tactics, before formation, before the clash of sword and shield, there was always the scout. The Roman war machine was vast, but it did not conquer by brute force alone. The legions were its might, yes, but if the legions were muscle, the scouts were nerves. They were the eyes that scanned the horizon, the instincts that sensed danger, and the whispers that moved faster than the marching column. From the earliest days of the Republic to the twilight of the Empire, Rome depended on information as much as discipline. Long before a formation locked shields in a testudo or a general gave the signal to charge, someone had already crept ahead to learn the lay of the land. That someone was a scout, sometimes in pairs, sometimes alone, sometimes Roman, but often not. And while the grand victories of Rome, Alesia, Zama, the conquest of Dacia, are remembered in bronze and stone, the quiet work of the exploratores and speculatores rarely earned mention in the histories. Yet without them, those victories may never have happened at all. Long before the imperial eagle spread across Europe and the Mediterranean, the Roman Republic was just one power among many in Italy. In those early centuries, Roman warfare was a messy affair. Tribes, city-states, and rival republics clashed in battles that were personal, localized, and often chaotic. There were no standing armies, just citizens summoned for seasonal campaigns. And yet even then, the need for reconnaissance was felt. Early Roman war bands likely relied on ad hoc scouts, hunters, riders, or young men with quick feet and sharper instincts. They were not part of a professional class, but they served a purpose. Before an army moved, someone had to check the roads. Before a battle, someone had to see how the enemy was positioned. And after a victory, someone had to watch the retreat. In these days, scouting was more an instinct than a role. Roman commanders understood that terrain and timing mattered, even if they lacked the formal terms. Livy, in his histories of early Rome, occasionally mentions messengers and advance guards, but these are fleeting references, like glimpses of shadows cast by figures we can't quite name. Still, we can infer from Roman success in Italy that they began to formalize reconnaissance far earlier than they let on. A republic constantly at war doesn't win by accident. It wins because someone, somewhere, is always watching. By the late Republic, Rome's military was evolving rapidly. No longer just seasonal farmers with spears. The Roman army had become a professional fighting force, disciplined, well-equipped, and increasingly global. Along with this evolution came a need for something more refined than guesswork. Dedicated scouts with specialized roles. Unlike their predecessors, these scouts weren't ad hoc. They were assigned, selected, and in some cases trained specifically to operate ahead of the main force. The exploratores were Rome's frontline intelligence gatherers, riders and runners, often drawn from auxiliary units or allied tribes, who moved days ahead of a legion to report on enemy strength, terrain, and activity. They operated in small teams, typically of 4 to 10 men, depending on the terrain and risk. Their mission: to remain unseen, cover ground quickly, and return alive with something useful. Sometimes they carried no weapons beyond a dagger. Speed and silence were their greatest defenses. Julius Caesar's Commentari de Bello Gallico, Commentaries on the Gallic War, gives us some of our clearest evidence of their use. Before every march or river crossing, Caesar dispatched scouts ahead, not just to confirm the route, but to observe enemy movement, civilian attitudes, and even weather conditions. The exploratores were more than lookouts. They were sensors, absorbing the environment and transmitting clarity back to command. One of Caesar's campaigns into Belgic territory nearly collapsed when a local tribe attempted an ambush. It was the exploratores, local cavalry auxiliaries, that detected the buildup of wagons and armed men behind a tree line. Caesar immediately rerouted, saving thousands of lives. The event occupies only a few lines in his commentary, but the impact was enormous, and it wasn't always human scouts. Rome frequently used trained dogs and even birds to detect movement or carry messages. But nothing could replace a man who understood the enemy's customs, who could blend into a market, or who could ride a stolen horse at night through enemy fields without lighting a torch. In time, the role of the explorator became essential to Roman campaign planning. They had no medals, they rarely had written orders, but their survival and silence were their currency, and generals trusted them like surgeons trusted steady hands. If the exploratores were Rome's eyes, the speculatores were its fingers, slipping through cracks, prying for secrets, and sometimes delivering messages sealed with blood. The speculatores emerged as a more covert counterpart to the exploratores, and by the 1st century BCE, their work extended beyond the battlefield. Officially, they were military scouts. Unofficially, they were Rome's intelligence officers, personal bodyguards, and even assassins when the Senate turned to darker tasks. They often served directly under commanders or provincial governors. Some were assigned to emperors themselves, operating within the cohors praetoria, or imperial guard.